Great, hello everybody. My name is Sophie Shrubsole. I run two SMEs in the UK, one of which actually operates in France and Belgium. Now the first business is a network here in London, so we directly connect businesses to potential customers, and we seek to navigate those gatekeepers and instead take you directly to the people that matter. So if you're interested in hearing about that, please do grab me later. My second business is I'm a tour operator. I design and deliver tours of the First World War battlefields to France and Belgium. Now through both of these businesses, I constantly come into contact with business owners who are suffering at the hands of yet more regulation, are having to jump through more hoops, and there are more barriers to growth. And I've also had direct personal experience of losing out on big contracts, which is a constant source of frustration and really prohibits my ability to grow and take on more staff. Now, there are roughly 20.8 million SMEs registered across the European Union, and this represents 99.8% of all businesses, and they contribute more than half of all European GDP. And if we look at those statistics, from 2009 to 2011, an estimated 56% of all public procurement contracts above the EU threshold were awarded to SMEs and groupings that were led by SMEs. And in terms of the value of those contracts, this represents about 29% of the market share. But it's obvious to me that SMEs are definitely underrepresented in public procurement compared to the weight and the importance within the economy. Now, our politicians keep telling us that SMEs are the backbone of the economy, and with these figures, it's absolutely clear to see. So why are SMEs always the afterthought? Well, for anyone that's as cynical as me, I think the big business out there is using their financial resource and the lobbying power to great effect. And of course, that's their prerogative. That's what big businesses are there to do. They've got customers and profits to make, absolutely. But obviously, regulation that affects SMEs and gets in their way is a surefire way to keep potential competitors tied up and busy, rather than being nimble and innovating and making progress both in their sector and also for consumers. Now, control of public procurement legislation is an integral feature and a feature of the single market. And in 1985, there was a white paper written which set out the European Commission's plan to create the single market, and they identified that discrepancies in public procurement was an impediment to completing that internal single market. And they argued that the EU-wide liberalisation of public procurement in the field of public sector services was vital for the community and the economy. And this was necessary in part to break down the psychological barriers to crossing borders. Now, EU public procurement legislation is now of general application and is extremely onerous on the requirements of public authorities. For example, public authorities are required to advertise their major tenders in the official journal of the European Union. And our Department of Communities and Local Government acknowledges that this is an extremely complex process and has many administrative requirements. And although SMEs are estimated to have secured about half of all public sector contracts above the EU thresholds, it's almost impossible for SMEs to access those really big contracts. Now, the use of a PQQ stage for the low-value contracts has now been prohibited, and contracting authorities are now only allowed to ask suppliers to have a turnover that is twice the value of the contract that they are applying for. But I often have conversations with small businesses that are saying, that threshold, the turnover that they have to have in order to bid for those contracts is the number one barrier for growth, being able to bid for contracts. Day in, day out, I have the same conversation. Fantastic companies, big sizes, great people, but they just can't bid for those contracts that are going to make them wealthier, make them be able to grow so they can employ more people. That's a huge barrier for business in the UK. Now, given that issue and the restrictive turnover requirements, SMEs are encouraged to tender for the smaller lots to break into the public sector. But these are effectively being run as an open procedure, which means there's even more work for SMEs, more form filling, and there's absolutely no guaranteed return on investment, of course not. And although we've got the introduction of the European Single Procurement Document, that's a bit of a mouthful, it's going to alleviate the burden somewhat. This isn't actually going to come into UK law until October 2018, which leaves a gap of about 2.5 years. So that's even more form-filling and just onerous documents. But one of the founding principles of the EU is that it was meant to be, it's meant to help us do business better with a number of nations and make the whole process much more easy. But for us to be able to trade and share opportunities for contracts in 28 nations, of course. But we need to wake up and realise that in Europe there's a healthy undercurrent of protectionism that exists right across many of those countries. For example, when we have our big infrastructure projects like Crossrail and all the big infrastructure projects that we have in this country, not only do we welcome those bids from big German engineering firms or transport providers across London, more often than not we give those contracts to European providers. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We believe, as business owners, I hope we do, that the best quality company at the right price should always win the contract, right? But that's not how it works in continental Europe. How many times have we heard the same story that, sorry, you can't apply for this contract, you can't bid for this because you're not French, for example. That's what I get all the time with my business, and I've lost out on big contracts because I was born in Britain. Often you hear young people that want to go to France and be ski instructors, but they can't because they weren't born in France. And I have exactly the same issue with my business. Now, I mentioned earlier on that buyers are being encouraged to break down those bids into smaller lots, but that's not been mandated for. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that I believe a sovereign British Parliament is much easier to influence. You and I are much more able to get in touch with our MPs, influence a sovereign British Parliament, than we are able to influence a European Union that is aloof and far off from what we can do as individuals to try and change it. Whereas big companies, they've got whole departments that are set up to try and influence. We just don't have that as the little guys. The EU is cumbersome and it's bureaucratic and it doesn't listen to small businesses. It certainly doesn't listen to individuals either. A European court has detailed procurement rules apply even when all the tenderers are established in this country, which means that the EU public procurement law applies to everything, even when it's of absolutely no value whatsoever and has no connection to promoting international trade either. So we, on the leave side of the argument, know that the EU legislation is far too bureaucratic and it's particularly costly for SMEs too. And even the European Commission has backed this up and said complying with EU regulation can cost a small business 10 times as much per employee as a large business. Now the referendum has got us going completely gaga over the importance of doing business with Europe. The trade deficit with Europe has opened up even further in the first quarter of 2016 to £23.9 billion. EU regulation costs the UK £600 million every single week. And because the EU law is supreme to ours, there is nothing we can do about it. But I think we need to look globally. We need to look beyond Europe. And a sovereign British government could help SMEs by pushing them into the fast and emerging markets first. But when you're shackled to a market through your membership, it clouds our ambitions and we're not thinking about the rest of the world, we're only thinking about Europe. Because, hey, we just paid £350 million this week to be a member, and that's what we're going to continue to do until we leave. So ladies and gentlemen, whatever happens on the 23rd of June, business will cope. It will cope. That's what we do. When we face challenges, we have to circumnavigate them. That's our job. But I think if we leave the EU, we won't just cope, we'll thrive. Now clearly I'm not basing my decision in June solely on procurement. The fact that more than half our country's laws are not made by anyone that we elect or we can remove, that does it for me straight away. Then there's the little matter of the £350 million a week, the fact that our judges are overruled, the fact that there's this great raft of bureaucracy that impedes all businesses, and this open border policy which makes it really difficult to recruit the brightest and the best from other parts of the world as well. So I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really take back control of our country, and I sincerely hope that you feel the same way and that you vote to leave on the 23rd of June. So thank you so much for coming along and listening to me. I really appreciate it.